So I'm now going to hand over to Parveen Dandy, Head of Programs at Tech Nation, to kickstart this conversation.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jordan. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this session. I would like to introduce our panelists, Sakshi Chhabra, Investor Director at Softbank Vision Fund, and John Azubuike, Senior Associate at Owl Venture. Welcome to you both.
Glad to be here.
Thank you so much. And John, you're joining us from New York as well.
That's right.
I'm hoping it's not too early for you.
No, good morning from over here. It's perfectly fine.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both for joining us. Before I ask you to introduce yourselves and to talk about where we are with EdTech, I just want to share with the audience some of the key stats around EdTech. So Jordan, in his intro, mentioned how much growth there is in EdTech, and it's grown by 72% in the last 12 months. But in addition to that, the UK EdTech sector grows to £3.5 billion. There's been exceptional growth in AR, and it's increased, I believe, by 119%. Digital classrooms has increased by 65%, and SaaS has increased by 57%. There's also been a 56% increase in jobs advertised in EdTech, and then 40% of all EdTech investment into Europe goes into the UK, and there's been a 91% increase in UK investment, with an increase of 8% in Europe, but a slight decrease in the USA. So I'd like to touch on those stats, but before I do, Sakshi, could you kindly introduce yourself? Tell us how long you've been with Softbank, what's the deal size you do, and the investments that you do. Thank you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Sakshi. I am on the investment team at Softbank Vision Fund. For those of you who don't know the Vision Fund, we're on our second fund. The first fund is about just shy of $100 billion, so probably the largest technology fund. The second fund is also in the tens of billions and keeps increasing month by month, day by day almost. We are technology investors. We're about 4 or 5 years old, and like I said, on our second fund, we invest in everything tech, data-driven. AI is a particular focus for us. We like large markets that are getting changed or disrupted by tech. Education is definitely a key pillar. It's a very large, impactful market. I mean, it is 5% of the total GDP. I mean, that's the market size, somewhere in the sort of 4 or 5 trillion range. So, very large market. Especially in the emerging markets, it is quite archaic, and I'm sure we're going to get into that discussion a little bit later on. But we've got a lot of investments in the space, and we've looked at a bunch of companies here. And I've been at the Vision Fund right from the start, so I've been about 5 years at the fund.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. John, over to you.
Absolutely. So, I work with Owl Ventures. We are the world's largest EdTech and workforce-focused fund with $1.2 billion under management across 5 funds and 55 portfolio companies now across 5 continents. We're a global investor, really looking for the strongest opportunities in education and sort of workforce development investing worldwide. We really cut the EdTech landscape into, let's say, sort of 3 broad categories. Your traditional institutional education, think childcare, K-12, higher education, selling into the nonprofit, for-profit organizations that sort of serve those spaces. All things that sort of develop the person in a corporate setting, and so that's everything from hiring to talent performance management, corporate training. Is that sort of second core tenet for us, and last is sort of thinking about the intersectionality that happens in the EdTech space. We sort of think about it internally as EdTech Plus, and that's really boils itself into all things consumer education, right? So, we're investors in businesses like, Masterclass and Quizlet that really, empower the individual to, take control of their education, as well as, let's say, this category of non-pedagogical tools that, work within educational settings, and examples therein are, companies that are active in cybersecurity for schools, telemedicine for schools. Actually, both of those are represented in the portfolio. Securely, which we actually recently exited to Golden Gate, a private equity firm, and Hazel Health, which is one of the fastest growing providers of sort of physician-led telemedicine in the U.S. And so that's sort of the way that we think about the EdTech landscape. And yes, personal notes. I've been with the team for 2 years, and previously was a private equity investor at a fund called TCB. And so in the time since I've been here, to Sakshi's point, of sort of seeing EdTech sort of grow from like let's call it a $5 trillion market to a $6 trillion post-pandemic market. But really why we exist is to capitalize on just the market opportunity, particularly the public market opportunity, right? This is a $6 trillion market that's 3% penetrated in terms of public market cap. Compare that to like a healthcare, fintech, all their multi-trillion-dollar markets that are in the 40-50% range. There's a lot of room to run in education.
Brilliant. Well, thank you to you both. So as you can see, you're definitely in the right spot if you want to understand why EdTech is booming and where the investment is going to be. So I would, please do ask your questions in the chat. We will go to Q&A during this session as well. So don't wait till the end. If there's any burning questions, please do put them in the chat. So where I would like to really start, and thank you both for the introduction, is around the current trends. So, at the beginning, in my opening remarks, I talked about certain trends in sort of AR, digital classrooms and so forth. From your point of view, I mean, Sakshi, you mentioned in terms of data-driven AI, you talked about, there's a very large market, especially in emerging markets. What would you say are the great sort of trends in this last year, and any initiatives that you've seen in the last year that has really excited you?
Yeah, I think, from what John said, what's really excited us has been the sort of first pillar that he had described, which is your, early education, K-12, test prep sort of markets, right? And that is something that's been super interesting for us, and we have sort of doubled down on in a lot of the geographies in the emerging market landscape. So from India to China to LATAM, we've made a bunch of investments in this space. We've got personalized learning tools with an investment in a company called Reed. We've got K-12. We've got test preps. So I think this is a space that's been really interesting for us. I mean, I can take India, for example, right? Like, the divide between tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities, and the only way out from tier 2 to tier 1, or like move up, right, is education. For these people to have their kids and their kids to be educated, to be able to earn enough to actually move into the higher tier category. Right. And, having these sort of democratized learning tools that are online, Unacademy is a great example. We had recently invested in a company called Unacademy in India. And they take star teachers, from across the sort of country, right? And, have these sort of live stream, content, which somebody sitting in any part of India can get access to. So they've made it affordable, they've made it accessible, they've sort of democratized that, right? And each of these teachers have their own following. So yeah, I think stuff like that has really been exciting for us.
And for John, is there anything for you to add to that? Is there any other certain areas of EdTech which you've mentioned that really sort of excites you?
Absolutely. I think I'm really excited about where direct-to-consumer education platforms are headed right now. If you sort of think about the last year and just companies that have sort of hit their scale, in our portfolio, sort of Masterclass on the sort of later learners level, Quizlet for earlier learners, sort of crossing into that unicorn status. Coursera recently sort of IPOing. There's a lot in the developed countries. There's a lot of opportunity for individuals to take responsibility for their own education and sort of own the opportunity to
sort of advance themselves. And as we look, it actually dovetails pretty well with what we're seeing in developing countries, where as access to data increases, there's more and more opportunities for students to start to invest in an app that will help them do catch up on let's say it's tutoring, this and that they may not have the opportunity to sort of paying out of pocket for an individual to run through that. That was a big part of our thesis in investing in ULesson in Africa, for example. And so really excited to watch the consumer dollars flow into education. I think that's going to be a huge boon in the coming years.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. Actually, we are receiving some questions from the audience, which is great. So one of the audience members has asked, what do you think about older students who may have grown up writing things down and reading things on paper and finding it more difficult to retain information which is read on screen? And then also relate to that question is what evidence that young children learn and retain better on paper rather than screen too? Do you have any thoughts on that? And have you seen any sort of companies that you've invested in that looks in terms of retaining knowledge via screen?
I actually the first part of the question is quite interesting because I think this is exact. I mean, I grew up in India, reading and writing and the sort of rote method of learning, and I look back and I think that I would often forget what I had learned right after my exam because I was learning for the exam. I wasn't learning for the curiosity of the subject. And as a result, I kind of found myself, struggling quite a lot in the early years to get my first job or my first internship because, of the way that I was taught, right? And I think that there is a fundamental problem in the education system, which is you need to, activate parts of the brain which are more curiosity driven, which are more practicality driven, where you can apply your learning into a real life sort of subject. And I think that's what EdTech does particularly well by creating interactive content, whether it's sort of gaming-led content or it's, whatever, right? But I actually think that that's where, EdTech beats these traditional methods of learning by a mile. And we invested in a company called VIP Think, which is super exciting because they sort of focus on the early education part. So children in age groups from 3 to 8 years, right? I have a toddler who's 3-year-old, who's super curious at the moment, right? But there isn't much on the market for him. And when he wants to sit and eat, he wants to watch Peppa Pig, which is a bit of a mind-numbing exercise, right? So the one thing that VIP kids do VIP Think does particularly well is these interactive gaming style of learning, which I think is actually changing the game for the better.
Absolutely echo everything that Sakshi shared there. I think digitization is a window into personalization when it comes to education, and so really what we like to invest in, and at OWL, and we actually have an in-house sort of outcomes measurement team to really understand what are the outcomes of the products that are produced by these portfolio companies. Are they really teaching students any better than any traditional model, or are we making sure that there aren't regressions in learning? And what we've seen time after time is when you're working through an interactive methodology, people forget that it truly is a give and take, a true interactivity on the back end. We're using
data on, what you have learned to, so we move you forward. Just thinking about a couple of portfolio companies, Bench Prep on the sort of, association LMS side, working with medical associations to leverage spaced repetition to help students understand, okay, you may be missing this when it comes to, anatomy, but you're doing really well in this in physiology. Here's how we can focus in on your weaknesses and, sort of give you credit for your strengths. Similarly, another company that's sort of, thinking about this, paper versus digital, company called EMEAI, which is looking to replace speech therapists, right? And not everybody has the access to resources to sort of hire somebody to help train them word by word on how to go from deficiency in language to being an at-level and advanced speaker. They are leveraging AI to listen to a student and understand what at the syllable level is their mastery of the English language. And I think that's something that you really just can't do with a pen and paper.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've been told we've only got 15 minutes to go, and I can't believe where the first 15 minutes went. What I would like to do is actually sort of move on in terms of, what lies in store for the EdTech industry in 5 to 10 years. So, we have had this phenomenal growth. Is that, in your mind, is that due to the pandemic? Even pre-pandemic, was there growth in the EdTech sector, or has a pandemic helped individuals or education institutions to cross that chasm, as it were? So I'd like to hear your thoughts in terms of where do you think EdTech will be in, say, 5 to 10 years time?
I think you're going to continue to see the trends that were, I'd like to say, catalyzed by the pandemic around direct to consumer education, personalized education, and I'd say increased employer activity when it comes to sort of moving employees along with upskilling, right? And here in the States, for example, we've seen homeschooling rates triple from 3 to 9-10%, as more and more families that were empowered to manage their kids' education. Sure, plenty of parents are happy that their kids are going back to school, but more and more having had the opportunity to teach their kids, they prefer it. They were able to find the tools, and they're more confident in what their students are learning, what their kids are learning, and I think that's going to keep moving forward. And on the employer side, a lot of what we're seeing is just the competition for highly skilled talent is only going to grow, and employers are more often looking to the best performers across categories and just empowering them internally to sort of move from, let's say, marketing to AI, which is traditionally super difficult to hire for, or IT to cybersecurity, which is another difficult space to find talent. And so we're going to see more of that. And I think thinking about this in the context of just the overall cost of education, you're going to start to see, I think, more and more of the burden at the later stages shift to employers.
Yeah. Is actually anything to add? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like I think there's plenty of low-hanging fruit. Like, so I guess can't disagree with what John said. But I do think that the pandemic has created a structural shift in the market. I think these are habits that are going to stay forever, for the long term, because essentially what's happened is it has made your time a lot more effective, right? It's made it a lot more efficient. By cutting out travel times or by cutting out infection rates, or however you want to measure it. So I don't think there's any going back in terms of the growth you're going to see in the different subsectors within EdTech. But yeah, I mean, look, I'm even excited about the other sectors, which is the sort of the focused on the childhood, the early childhood learning, all the way till the end.
Brilliant. Well, we've got some more questions from the audience as well. how actually this is something that I did want to ask about, is about EdTech platforms, and how do you think they plan to reduce the digital divide?
Yeah, I could sort of take the first stab. I think one of the more impressive things that I saw sort of at the start of the pandemic was EdTech companies making their offerings free while parents and institutions were just sort of navigating this difficult period. I think that was just a great show of community, right? And in the EdTech world, I think it also was born from this conversation around access and just why are individuals building this. As we see more and more talent come into the EdTech world, the dollars are there, and there is an opportunity to make a profit, but you are seeing much more intentionality around what individuals are building, how they're pricing things, and the institutions that they're willing to partner with to advance their goals. And I do think it's something that's very much top of mind for educational institutions. The number of times that a founder is going to pitch and say, hey, we're not making this for the rich kid, we're really trying to change lives. So I think it really starts with the ethos. Now, how that sort of plays itself out in terms of sort of business execution, it's going to vary from one organization to the next, right? You'll have in some cases organizations that sell to under-resourced school districts, sort of adjusting pricing accordingly. Organizations that sell direct to consumer, sort of creating cohorts of free sort of free licenses for the most disadvantaged students. It varies, but I think this is top of mind for a lot of EdTech founders.
And I actually think that it sort of reduces the divide. I mean, in the way I look at it, right? Like previously, somebody who didn't have access to resources could not afford a personal tutor or could not afford that level of personalization. But today, with companies using AI, machine learning, they are personalizing education for you at prices that are super affordable or even free in many cases, like John said, right? So that level of personalized, no one size fits all, I think only sort of this digital education era is able to provide, right? Which was never existent before.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sorry, John, yeah.
Sorry, I was just thinking the last thing I would add there is you move beyond developed countries into developing countries. I think the proliferation of just access to data, right? Like I think broadband access in let's say middle income and lower income countries is probably going to do more to bridge the digital divide than anything that a particular EdTech company can do. So as more and more students come online, you're going to start to see the benefits of that access.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Actually, I mean, it goes back to that point you made at the beginning, John, about intersectionality. And also, Sakshi, you just mentioned about, personalizing education as well. And I think those two really do go hand in hand together as well. So in terms of EdTech, so yes, we are talking about, it is booming. It will change in terms of how people are learning. What do you think is holding EdTech back at the moment? What do governments need to do more of? What do institutions need to do more of, or even investors as well?
As you look to, let's say different areas of the market, let's say in the developing world, as I mentioned before, I think just you need that broadband access. You need sort of some of those infrastructural investments in telecommunications to bring let's say the other 3 billion back sort of online to the level where they can access megabytes and gigabytes of data that's going to advance their education per month, right? When we think about educational content, what are we talking about? It's videos, right? It's chat back and forth, and these things are going to be difficult without some of those infrastructural investments in telecom.
And I'd say, in the developed world, I think the conversation around cost is one that, especially in the US, continues to rage, and just, you're starting to see that conversation move in a pair of directions. One is, does education need to cost this much when, you could learn a whole ton in a forum like this, from the benefit of your bedroom, your living room, right? And you'll sort of receive every lecture that you would as if you were on campus. So, is there a cost reduction story going on? And then, in another avenue, to whom does, the benefit of this education accrue? Is it the individual themselves, or is it their employer? And just, going back to what I was talking about sort of earlier in the conversation, is there more of an avenue for employers to, pay for, students to, gain the skills that they need?
And I would also add to that. I mean, I think I would also say, if you're looking at emerging markets, let's say a large market like China, regulatory frameworks which can be complex and can be, changing a lot, right? Again, that has an impact as well on the sector overall, right? Especially as new companies are, coming up and scaling. Not being able to pivot fast enough, based on these sort of regulatory frameworks, I think could be another obstructing factor.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm just going to go back to the questions. So there's a question, and if anyone else has any questions, please do put them in the chat. So one of the questions was, how quickly do you see the growth of purely online degrees on platforms such as Coursera? And do you see the emergence of credible degree equivalent qualifications from these platforms or companies?
I mean, a lot of what we've seen, and I'll break this answer into, just sort of thinking about purely online degrees. And let's say, online degree alternative, right? Like the world of boot camps and things like that. A lot of what we're seeing here is, where you will see the activity is in, let's say, alternatives to the first degree, right? So we were invested in a simulated learning platform called Interplay that focuses in on, sort of HVAC and, sort of the middle skills professions, plumbing, right? In professions for which you don't need that first degree. Tons of growth there, right? You're looking at work rise and the demand for manufacturing and construction talent, and then you're going to see similar activity after the first degree, right? So when you think about boot camps, online degrees, they're really competing with traditional master's level education and beyond, licensing and things like that, right? Our investments in Noodle Partners, it's a OPM provider, for postgraduate degrees. It's more often going to come across, somebody who is going for like an alternative to the university education, right? Similar to our investment in SV Academy, which is really trying to get people that first sales job in tech. These are individuals that often already have that bachelor's in something, and so I think there's almost like a sanctity to the first university degree, but a lot of innovation going on at let's say the associate's level and the master's level.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it goes back to Saski's point in terms of personalization, because also, the skills that are required going forward as well, especially in tech. Sakshi, do you have any viewpoints on that at all?
I mean, personally, I think, equivalent qualifications from these platforms, I actually think that's going to happen sooner rather than later, because if you look at what's happened in the pandemic, students who had paid for, think about international students who had paid for foreign education degrees in like Ivy League schools or in non-Ivy League schools in the US or in the UK. These are extremely expensive. Pandemic happens, they weren't able to travel. So they were, they paid the same amount as they would have, right, for being in university inside that lecture theater or studio or whatever. But they're doing it remotely from their home country, right? But they're paying I don't know, 10 times higher multiple, right? And what they come out with is a degree, is a qualification, right? But how is that any different from if they were to do an online course, right, from anywhere in the world? So I think this divide is going to get smaller.
It's good. It's really good. John, a question from the audience for you. Can you tell us a bit more about the expected persistence or not of homeschooling post-pandemic in, say, the UK or the US, and that you mentioned a 3% figure growing to 9%?
Absolutely. So, homeschooling, this is just one of those areas where, I've spent a bit of time sort of focusing in on just, working on the thesis that as digital tools become more and more robust and, individuals become more and more empowered to sort of educate their kids, and that the amount of tooling that you're going to need to sort of run through that, it's becoming less and less expensive. We feel like we felt that there was going to be a gradual, increase in the number of families that opt for homeschooling, and a lot of just sort of growing disappointment with let's say public education or the price of private education. The pandemic, absolutely, was an accelerant towards that, right? Like, while parents, just opting to teach their kids rather than, have them go through Zoom school. And I think we do think that, the days of 3% are going to be behind us, and that, you're already starting to see a little bit of melt. That, 9% is actually down slightly from 11% at the peak of the pandemic. But we do believe that things are going to start to level off, let's say, in those high single digits, because if you sort of think about this number in context, these are the 9% that opted to just take their kids out of the school system entirely. Another 91% decided that Zoom school and sort of the publicly available opportunities, going through their private school online, it was still a good option for them. And so I think as tools become sharper and families become more and more accustomed to this mode of learning, I think you're going to start to see this number stabilize over time.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I'd like to ask an investment question. So, there is a lot of investment in this area that you both mentioned. Is it more for sort of early stage companies, or is it more for scaling companies? Is it a bit of a mix? And do you feel that, companies have everything they need in order to scale an EdTech company? Sakshi, I'd like to come to you first.
Yeah. So, as you know, we are growth stage investors. So, in our first fund, we, our minimum check size tended to be in the 100 million sort of mark. Our second fund, we're a lot more flexible because we sort of realized that, companies do need little assistance in terms of funding a little bit earlier on as well. We have a portfolio of about, I would say, roughly 10-ish, investments in the EdTech space, mostly in emerging markets. Like I said, covers India, China, a lot of LATAM. And, each of the checks that have sort of gone in would probably range in the sort of at least above 100 million-ish range, or in that sort of price level. So I think we are seeing companies, get funded, reach this sort of level where, they can absorb this kind of capital. We're also seeing a lot of, companies get funded on the earlier stages, mid stages in EdTech. There's clearly this sector has benefited from the pandemic because it's taught people, how to, touch and feel education through tech, similar to healthcare, I think, like we had discussed. So I think we definitely see this on the rise.
Fantastic. John, anything to add?
Yeah, we are a venture stage investor, $3 to $50 million checks, and so Series A through pre-IPO companies, and to have I think back in 2014 when the fund was founded, to have like a Series B, Series C, investor that 100% dedicated to EdTech was almost unheard of, right? Just the opportunities were not at that scale, at least domestically, right? A company hits a certain stage and they would trade to private equity where they would sort of grow for a while and just it's a highly profitable model. That's what EdTech was, and I think now you're starting to see just this explosion of super scaled education businesses that could sort of use the support of an investor that is sort of writing 50 $100 million checks into the category. So it's exciting to be here.
Brilliant. So say I'm a founder and I'm looking for investment, and I come to both of you. What would you expect to see, in terms of someone's sort of pitch deck in 2021? What do you think that the areas that the founder needs to be covering? Sakshi, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think clearly explaining the sort of problem and the solution. I think that's something that always resonates really well, because as an investor you tend to see a lot of these decks, and if you really want something to stick out, make that problem solution really clear. And I think as you're pitching, we especially at Softbank, we are super founder driven or entrepreneur driven. Master likes to meet with every entrepreneur before making that investment, no matter how small or big it is. So I feel like that entrepreneurial energy, the clear vision and mission, sort of come across. But other than that, would love to see the business model and the sort of economics, how that kind of plans out today and in the near future.
Fantastic. John, anything to add? Any advice you can give to founders that are looking to raise capital, whether it's Series A and beyond?
Yeah, echo everything that Sakshi said on the founder, right? I think that relationship between the investor and the founder is super important. I'd say beyond that, it's is it growing? Does it work? And do people like it, right? And so the way that you sort of answer those questions end up living in just what has the financial story been, and what are the outcomes that you are expecting to see? What are you seeing relative to what's already in the market? And just really, really taking care of your customers, and really having them take care of you effectively. Like, are they retaining? Are they coming back? These are things that we like to ask every company that comes across our door from early to late stages.
Brilliant. Well, look, one last question, and actually Jordan mentioned it at the beginning before he introduced us, and also a question that's come through one of the audience members. So one of the audience members says they're a private investor with 100K to invest in EdTech. Where should that person be looking? And I think Jordan's also interested as well. So any last minute tips that you could give?
I would invest in early childhood education.
And John, from you? Oh, it's tough. I would say invest in an individual that wows you, that's pursuing something in the category, even if that business doesn't work. Great founders have a habit of building great things, and so build that relationship over time.
Brilliant. And just final thoughts from you both. Thank you so much for joining. And John, I don't know why, because you've dialed in from New York, it just feels more sort of special. But that's the beauty of technology today. But any final thoughts about this EdTech sector, in terms of where the title is Follow the Money? What are your final thoughts for our audience members?
Yeah, I'd say that one of the things that I really, really have enjoyed about this category is its intersectionality, right? You're going to see every business model in education, and it plays a role in really every function. And so I think as more and more companies are founded, they will have a training angle. They will have, a customer education or an employee education angle. And, so just really thinking about that as, you're looking at different opportunities and maybe you're creating something yourself, right? Like what is the training opportunity here? And, it's exciting to see EdTech come as far as it has.
Brilliant. And Sakshi, from you.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with John. There's so many different subsectors, within this massive industry of EdTech. A lot of it is still low-hanging fruit. We're seeing different sort of business models, diversified revenue streams, a lot of engagement. Sometimes we've seen like more engagement on these EdTech platforms for some of our companies than you would find on like Facebook, YouTube, which is huge, right? So I think we're entering into a new era of education, and I'm super excited about that.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. I would like to thank you so much to you both. Thank you for being, sharing your insights, giving your opinions in terms of EdTech and where to invest. I'm very excited about this space as well. So thank you, Sakshi and John. I appreciate it.